Harrison Territory, 1875. Elle knelt before the simple headstone, her dark mourning dress pooling around her like spilled ink against the dry earth. 3 years had passed, yet she still visited every week, as constant as the desert sun that beat down on her covered head. "I keep my promise, Jace," she whispered, fingers tracing the engraved letters of her husband's name. "No one will ever take your place." The cemetery overlooked Tucson, a dusty frontier town that had grown considerably since she first arrived as a bride 7 years ago. Jace had been 20 years her senior, a respected banker, businessman, and the man who had given her everything. Security, respect, position. In return, she had been a dutiful wife, perhaps not the passionate bride he had hoped for, but a partner who had honored him. When consumption took him, the town expected her to crumble. Instead, Elle had hardened like the desert floor after a rare rain, beautiful in its way, but unyielding. At 25, Elle was the wealthiest widow in the Arizona Territory, with a fine home on the edge of town, controlling interest in her late husband's bank, and a reputation as untouchable as the distant mountains. Her mourning clothes had become both shield and statement. She was done with love, done with vulnerability. Rising to her feet, Elle brushed the dust from her skirts. The late afternoon light painted the landscape in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the cemetery. She nodded to the groundskeeper as she made her way to her waiting carriage. "Mrs. Hayes," called a familiar voice. Elle turned to see May hurrying toward her parasol tilted against the sun. The mayor's wife was Tucson's self-appointed social director and had been trying to coax Elle back into society for the past year. "May," Elle acknowledged with a polite nod. "I'm so glad I caught you." May fanned herself in the heat. "You simply must attend our dinner tomorrow evening. General Grant will be there with several Army officers. The situation with the Apaches is most concerning," she insisted. Elle hesitated. "I appreciate the invitation, but no." May's smile was pleasant but determined. 3 years is quite sufficient for deep mourning, dear. Even Queen Victoria made public appearances after Prince Albert's passing. Jace would want you to live again. May added, her voice soft but insistent. Elle's spine stiffened. "You didn't know my husband well enough to speak of his wishes." "Perhaps not," May conceded, unruffled. "But I know that a woman your age with your means ought not to waste away in solitude. 7 o'clock tomorrow, the general specifically asked after you." Before Ella could refuse again, May was already walking away, victory in her shoulders. Elle sighed. Perhaps it was time. The thought of sitting through an evening of trite conversation held no appeal. But continuing to refuse would only fuel gossip. That night, as her maid helped her prepare for bed, Elle caught her reflection in the mirror. The dark clothing accentuated her pallor, making her gray eyes seem larger, more haunted. Her chestnut hair was pulled back severely, showing no hint of the waves that had once made Jace call her his wild beauty. "Will you wear the navy silk tomorrow, ma'am?" asked Liv, her lady's maid. "It's been aired and pressed." Elle nodded. Navy was still mourning, but not the unrelenting black she had worn for 3 years. A small concession to May's persistence. "And perhaps the pearl earrings," Liv ventured. "No jewelry," Elle replied firmly. She wasn't ready for that step yet. Jewelry suggested celebration, frivolity. After dismissing Liv, Elle stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the desert beyond Tucson. The moon cast silver light across the landscape, transforming it into something ethereal and dangerous. Something stirred within her, a restlessness she hadn't felt in years. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, as if reaching for that wild freedom. "Foolishness," she whispered to herself. "Pure foolishness." The following afternoon, Elle decided to visit the bank before preparing for the dreaded dinner. Her business acumen had surprised many after Jace's death. While she had a manager who handled the daily operations, Elle reviewed all major decisions and investments. Today, however, her purpose was to retrieve documents from the safe. As her carriage traveled the rutted road toward town, a cloud of dust appeared in the distance. "Hold up, Gus," she called to her driver. The carriage slowed as a group of riders approached soldiers escorting a wagon. Elle recognized Captain Zane at the head of the column. Zane pulled alongside her carriage and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Hayes, what brings you out alone today?" "I'm hardly alone, Captain. Gus is with me and we're just heading into town." Zane's expression darkened. "Not the safest time for travel, ma'am. We've had reports of Apache raids within 20 miles. "Chief Kade's band," Elle replied. She'd heard the name whispered in frightened tones throughout Tucson. Kade, the Apache warrior who had eluded Pambato capture for years, leading raids against ranches and outposts. Some said he had been taught at a government school before returning to his people, which only made him more dangerous. "Thank you for your concern, Captain, but Tucson is perfectly safe," Elle replied, keeping her voice steady. She glanced toward the wagon. "We're bringing in a warrior from his band, caught him scouting near Fort Lowell." Zane nodded toward the wagon. Elle's eyes flicked to the prisoner. A man sat with his hands bound, his head held high despite his captivity. Unlike the other Apache she'd seen in town. Broken men dressed in rags, this one exuded defiance. His black hair cascaded past his shoulders, and his bronze skin was marked with intricate designs. Their eyes met briefly, but Elle felt the connection like a physical blow. Pride. That was the difference between him and the others. Even in defeat, he carried himself with unshakable dignity. The thought unsettled her. "Will you be at the Whitman's dinner this evening?" Zane's voice drew her back to the present. "Yes, I suppose I will." Elle responded, her words almost mechanical. "Excellent. I look forward to seeing you there." Zane smiled, his expression tinged with something more than professionalism. Elle nodded politely, yet distantly, her attention already drifting back to the prisoner. As the soldiers moved forward, she couldn't help but watch him. Just before they vanished from view, he turned his head, and their eyes met once again across the distance. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Not of faces, but of something deeper. Two people who had lost everything, yet refused to break. The moment lasted only seconds before the dust cloud swallowed them. Elle pressed her hand to her throat, feeling the rapid beat of her pulse. She told herself it was nothing more than the excitement of an unusual encounter. But as Gus urged the horses forward again, Elle couldn't shake the image of those proud, defiant eyes. That evening, the Whitman home buzzed with Tucson's elite. Elle's entrance stirred a quiet ripple through the crowd. Her navy silk dress marked her first step away from the deepest mourning. She nodded to acquaintances, accepting condolences that had grown stale with repetition. "Elle, my dear," May bustled forward, leading a distinguished older man. "General Grant has been most eager to meet you." General Grant, in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed white beard and the commanding presence of a man used to authority, offered Elle a handshake. "Mrs. Hayes, your reputation precedes you. A woman managing her husband's affairs with such competence is remarkable." "Thank you, General, though I find nothing remarkable about protecting one's interests," Elle replied, maintaining her composure. Spoken like a true frontier woman, he offered his arm. "Would you allow me to introduce you to some of my officers? The Apache situation is worsening, and your influence in the territory could be invaluable." As they crossed the room, Elle spotted Captain Zane in conversation with several officers. He straightened when he saw her, his eyes warming with interest. "Ah, Mrs. Hayes," Zane greeted. "You remember Lieutenant Duke and Major Cole? We were just discussing today's capture." "The Apache scout?" Elle asked, though she already knew. "Not just any scout," Zane replied. "Kade, one of Chief Kade's most trusted warriors. He'll be questioned thoroughly before his execution." Elle's teacup rattled slightly in its saucer. Execution without trial. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances, and General Grant cleared his throat. "My dear Mrs. Hayes, these savages aren't entitled to the same legal processes as civilized men. They're enemies of the United States government. I see, Elle said, setting down her cup. And does executing their scouts help resolve the conflict? It sends a message, Zane stated firmly. Elle thought of the warrior's proud bearing, the dignity that remained despite his bonds. What message exactly? That we fear them so much we won't even honor our own principles of justice. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. May appeared at Elle's elbow, her smile strained. Elle, dear, Mrs. Vera is simply dying to hear about your new draperies. Elle allowed herself to be led away, aware of the disapproving looks from the officers. She had spoken out of turn, questioning military decisions as a woman. Jace would have been mortified, yet she couldn't forget those eyes. Dark, knowing eyes that had seen through her carefully constructed facade in an instant. Eyes that might soon be closed forever. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of meaningless conversation. When Captain Zane approached to escort her to dinner, Elle found herself counting the minutes until she could return home to solitude. You seem troubled, Mrs. Hayes, Zane observed as they took their seats. I hope our earlier discussion didn't upset you, he added, his voice soft. Not at all, Elle lied. I simply find it difficult to reconcile Christian values with summary executions. Zane leaned closer, his voice low. The Apaches have killed countless settlers, women and children among them. Some said Kade himself led the raid that wiped out the Franklin family last month. These aren't men you can reason with, Zane said firmly. Elle nodded, though doubt lingered in her chest. There was something about the captured warrior that haunted her. It wasn't just his pride, but the intelligence in his gaze. There was no hatred there, just a clear-eyed assessment. He had seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one in Tucson ever had. It was well past midnight when Elle finally returned home. As Liv helped her undress, Elle found herself asking, "What do you know of the Apache prisoner they brought in today?" Liv paused for a moment, her hands stilling. "Only whispers, ma'am. They say he's being held at the fort for questioning before they hang him." Questioning, Elle repeated the weight of the word hanging heavily in the air, thinking of what that might entail. "Yes, ma'am," Liv continued as she carefully hung up the navy dress. "They believe he knows where Chief Kade's band is hiding." Elle stared at her reflection in the mirror, at the proper widow with her hair pulled back tight. The woman who had buried her heart alongside her husband. For the first time in 3 years, something cracked in that carefully composed exterior. It wasn't grief, but outrage. What was it about that warrior that disturbed her so? Was it misplaced compassion or something deeper? As she lay in bed that night, sleep evaded her. Kade's face kept appearing in her mind. Those eyes that had recognized something in her. Maybe the same isolation, the same refusal to surrender that he himself carried. Elle turned restlessly, watching moonlight create shifting patterns on her bedroom wall. Beyond the window lay the desert, vast and untamed. Somewhere out there was a people fighting for their existence, led by a chief named Kade, whose name struck fear into settlers' hearts. Tomorrow, Elle decided she would speak to her bank manager about certain legal matters and perhaps visit the fort under the guise of bringing comforts to the soldiers, as other society ladies often did. It would be nothing more than civic duty, she told herself. Yet even as she drifted towards sleep, she knew she was lying to herself for the first time since Jace's death. Change was coming, as inevitable as the desert wind, and somehow it had begun with a single glance exchanged with a captive warrior. The morning sun barely crested the eastern mountains when Elle directed her carriage toward Fort Lowell. She had dressed with care, a dark gray dress, modest but finer than her usual morning attire, and a small basket of provisions as her excuse. Gus, her driver, questioned the early hour, but knew better than to argue with his employer. In the 3 years since Jace's death, Elle had proven herself more stubborn than most men in Tucson. "Wait here," Elle instructed as they reached the fort's gates. "I shouldn't be long." The soldier at the gate eyed her with surprise. Hayes, isn't it? What brings you here so early? Elle smiled pleasantly, offering the rehearsed explanation. I've brought some small comforts for our brave soldiers. Books, preserves, tobacco. The usual ladies' aid offerings. Very kind of you, ma'am. I'll have someone escort you to the common office. Actually, Elle said, her heart beating faster. I understand there's a prisoner being held. I've brought a Bible as well. Thought perhaps he might benefit from some spiritual guidance before. She let the sentence hang in the air, unsure of how it sounded. The soldier's expression hardened. The Apache, he asked, his voice wary. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but that's no place for a lady. I've seen worse than a prison cell soldier, Elle replied coolly. My husband died a painful death while I tended him for months, so I'm hardly some delicate flower. The soldier hesitated, then shrugged. Wait here, ma'am. I'll see what the captain says. Elle stood straight in the morning sun, mentally rehearsing arguments should Zane refuse her. To her surprise, the soldier returned with Lieutenant Duke, who seemed amused by her request. Mrs. Hayes, this is unexpected, Duke said with a raised brow. Captain Zane mentioned you showed interest in our prisoner last night, but he didn't anticipate a visit. Is the captain here? Elle asked, suddenly concerned that Zane might complicate matters. Left at dawn with a patrol searching for Kade's band. Duke replied, studying her with undisguised curiosity. You understand this man is responsible for American deaths. He's not some missionary's convert. I understand he's a man facing death without trial, Elle replied evenly. Christian charity doesn't discriminate, Lieutenant, she added firmly. Duke chuckled, but it was a hollow sound. As you wish, ma'am, though I doubt he'll appreciate your gesture. 5 minutes, no more, Elle said, her voice resolute, and I'll be present the entire time. He led her across the parade ground to a small adobe building used for storage and apparently holding prisoners. Inside, the air was stifling despite the early hour. A single cell had been fashioned at the back with iron bars across the front. The warrior sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, his back straight despite the chains that bound his wrists. His eyes opened as they approached, immediately locking onto Elle's. Look alive, Kade, Duke called mockingly. You have a visitor, the good widow. Hayes has come to save your soul. The prisoner said nothing. His gaze locked onto Elle's with unwavering intensity. There was no surprise in his expression, as if he had expected her presence. 5 minutes, Duke reminded her, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Elle approached the cell, doing her best to keep her hands from shaking. Up close, she could see the warrior Kade, as they called him, had been beaten. A bruise darkened one of his cheekbones, and dried blood caked the corner of his mouth. I've brought water, she said, pulling a canteen from her basket, and some food. When he didn't respond, she asked, Do you speak English? A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his features. When he spoke, his English was perfect with only the slightest accent. I speak English, Spanish, and 3 Apache dialects, Mrs. Hayes. The question is whether you have anything worth saying, Duke interjected, hand drifting toward his pistol. What's your tongue, savage? Elle raised her hand. It's a fair question, Lieutenant, she said, turning back to Kade. I don't know what's worth saying to a man in your position. I don't pretend to understand your circumstances. Elle added, her voice soft but steady. Yet here you are, Kade observed. Why? It was the same question Elle had asked herself since the dawn. Why risk her reputation for a visit to an enemy prisoner? The answer came suddenly clear as day. Because yesterday, when our eyes met, I recognized something. She lowered her voice. Pride, resilience, the refusal to be broken. Kade's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of his own. The Bible, Duke prompted, his tone mocking. Elle had nearly forgotten her pretext. She reached into her basket, pulling out the small Bible and offering it through the bars along with the canteen. Water first, scripture later, if you wish. Kade made no move to take either. I have no use for your God, Mrs. Hayes. He has shown little mercy to my people. Then take the water as a gesture from me, not from any God. After a long moment, Kade reached for the canteen. His fingers brushed hers through the bars. The touch lasted only an instant, but Elle felt it like a spark against her skin. Your time's up, Mrs. Hayes, Duke announced. Elle placed the bread and dried meat she had brought on the small ledge inside the bars. Is there anything else you need? Kade's lips curved in a small, rueful smile. Freedom would be welcome. I'm afraid that's beyond my power to give. Is it? Kade leaned closer to the bars, his voice dropping to a whisper. Nothing is beyond your power, Elle Hayes. You simply haven't decided to use it yet. The use of her first name startled her, as did the certainty in his tone. Before she could respond, Duke was at her side, guiding her firmly away. Thank you for the courtesy, Lieutenant, Elle said as they emerged into the sunlight. When is the execution scheduled? Duke frowned. That depends on what information we get from him. Probably within the week. Without trial, Elle repeated. Mrs. Hayes. Duke said, his patience clearly thinning. He's an enemy combatant, not a citizen. The rules of war apply. Elle nodded, though the distinction felt hollow, arbitrary. As she walked back toward her waiting carriage, a commotion at the fort's gate caught her attention. Riders were entering at speed, one slumped over his saddle. Apache ambush, someone shouted. The fort erupted into activity. Duke immediately left Elle's side, running toward the incoming patrol. Elle stood forgotten in the chaos, watching as soldiers helped the wounded man down from his horse. Captain Zane dismounted his uniform, stained with dust and what looked like blood. His expression was thunderous as he strode toward the commandant's building. As the injured soldier was carried to the infirmary, Elle caught fragments of conversation. An ambush 10 miles east, 3 men dead, the rest barely escaping. The name Kade rippled through the gathered soldiers like a curse. Gus hurried to Elle's side. Mrs. Hayes, we should leave. Elle nodded, allowing Gus to help her into the carriage, but her mind raced with the implications. Chief Kade had attacked a patrol, likely in response to Kade's capture. The situation was escalating, and the Apache prisoner's life now hung by an even thinner thread. As the carriage pulled away from the fort, Elle found herself looking back at the small adobe building. Kade's words echoed in her mind. Nothing is beyond your power, Elle Hayes. You simply haven't decided to use it yet. What had he meant? What power did a widow, even a wealthy one, have against military authority? The question plagued her throughout the day as she went about her business in town. At the bank, her manager, Mr. Harrington, noticed her distraction. Are you unwell, Mrs. Hayes? He asked after she failed to respond to a question about a loan application. Forgive me, Mr. Harrington. I have much on my mind today, Elle said, gathering her composure. The Apache prisoner at the fort. What do you know of him? Harrington's eyebrows rose in surprise. Niati. Harrington's voice was tight with discomfort. Only what everyone knows. One of Kade's lieutenants captured 2 days ago. They say he's refusing to reveal Kade's location despite persuasive methods. Torture, you mean? Elle asked, her voice steady, despite the unsettling thought. Harrington shifted uncomfortably in his chair. These are difficult times, Mrs. Hayes, he said. The Apache raids have everyone on edge. After what happened to the Franklin family. Yes, I've heard about the Franklin massacre, Elle said flatly. Repeatedly. General Grant has requested additional troops from Fort Bowie, Harrington continued. There's talk of a major campaign to capture Kade once and for all. Elle's mind was already made up. She nodded, her decision clear. Mr. Harrington, I need to make a withdrawal. A significant one. The manager blinked in surprise. Of course. May I ask the purpose? He inquired. You may not, Elle said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. "And I would appreciate your discretion in this matter." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness claimed Tucson, Elle paced in her study. The bag of gold coins sat heavily on her desk beside a folded map of the territory. What she was contemplating felt reckless, foolish even. It was potentially treasonous. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Liv entered, her face troubled. "Captain Zane is here to see you, ma'am. He's quite insistent." Elle's stomach tightened. Had her visit to Kade already caused trouble? "Show him in, then prepare some tea," she instructed, steeling herself. Zane entered, hat in hand. His uniform was clean now, but his face still bore the grime of the trail. His eyes were sharp alert. "Mrs. Hayes, forgive the late hour," he said. "Captain, what brings you here?" Elle asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "I've just come from questioning the prisoner." Zane's gaze narrowed slightly. "He mentioned you visited him this morning." Elle kept her expression calm. "I did. I brought provisions and offered spiritual comfort, as many ladies do for prisoners." "Apache prisoners." Zane's voice was laced with skepticism. "Does their race determine whether Christian charity applies, Captain?" Zane's jaw tightened, and he took a step closer. Mrs. Hayes, that man is a killer. His band has slaughtered dozens of settlers, and now, because of him, I've lost 3 good men today." "I heard about the ambush," Elle said quietly. "You have my condolences." "I don't want condolences," Zane snapped. "I want justice." He paced her study, the tension in the air palpable. "Kade is escalating his attacks. The prisoner knows where his camp is located, but he refuses to talk." Elle's voice was quiet but firm. "And you believe torturing him will produce honest information?" Zane stopped pacing, his expression hardening. "This is war, Mrs. Hayes, not some drawing room disagreement. Lives are at stake." "I'm well aware of the stakes, Captain," Elle replied, her tone controlled. "I simply question the methods." Your husband would have understood the necessity. The mention of Jace's name hit Elle like a cold wave. "My husband is dead, Captain. I speak for myself now." Zane stepped closer, his tone softening. "Anna, may I call you Anna?" His gaze softened as he studied her. "I understand your compassion. It's one of the qualities I admire in you. But these are dangerous times, and Kade is a dangerous man." "When will he be executed?" Elle asked directly, her eyes locking onto his. "Tomorrow at dawn," Zane replied, holding her gaze. "General Grant has ordered it. After today's attack, there's no point in further questioning. We'll make an example of him." Elle turned away, fighting to maintain her composure. "I see." Zane paused, his expression turning serious. "I came to warn you, stay away from the fort tomorrow. This is no sight for a lady." "Thank you for your concern," Elle said, her voice steady. Zane reached for her hand, his touch lingering just a moment too long. "When this Apache business is settled, I hope you'll allow me to call on you properly. A woman in your position needs protection, especially in these times." Elle gently withdrew her hand. "Good night, Captain. I wish you success in your campaign against Chief Kade." After Zane's departure, Elle stood motionless in her study, weighing her options. The execution was set for dawn. She had only hours to act if she intended to make a difference. Liv entered with tea, her expression filled with concern. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Elle made her decision. "No, Liv, it isn't. But it will be." She moved to her desk, picking up the map and the bag of coins. "I need you to prepare a travel bag for me. Practical clothing only. Riding clothes if possible. And I'll need food for several days." Liv's eyes widened. "Are you going somewhere, ma'am?" "Yes," Elle replied steadily, her gaze unwavering. "And what I'm about to do, I do alone. You know nothing of it. Understand?" Liv nodded, a look of concern still clouding her features. If anyone asks, I retired with a headache and gave instructions not to be disturbed until morning. Good, Elle said grimly. You should be frightened. I'm terrified myself. Now go, prepare what I need, and Liv, thank you for your loyalty these past years. As Liv hurried to obey, Elle turned toward the window. Beyond the flickering lights of Tucson lay the vast empty desert, a wilderness she had always viewed from a distance, never daring to step into its unforgiving embrace. Tonight, that would change. Tonight, Elle Hayes would break her promise to her late husband, defy the law, and risk everything she held dear. For what? For a stranger, for principle, or for something deeper? Something she wasn't yet ready to name. Whatever the reason, once she stepped into the night, there would be no turning back. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, for the first time in 3 years, Elle felt truly alive. The hour before dawn found Elle Hayes dressed in her late husband's riding clothes, hastily altered by Liv as she made her way through the shadows toward Fort Lowell. The trousers felt scandalously foreign against her legs, the weight of Jace's pistol unfamiliar at her hip, but both were necessary for what she planned. Gus waited with 2 horses in a dry wash half a mile from the fort. The loyal driver had questioned her sanity, but in the end he agreed to help, bound by years of service to the Hayes family. The east gate has only 1 guard at this hour, Gus whispered as Elle approached. But this is madness, ma'am, pure madness. Noted, Elle replied, checking the saddle on her horse. Remember, wait 1 hour. If I haven't returned, go back to the house and tell no one where I've gone. And if you do return— Elle paused, her voice lowering. Pray we're fast enough to reach the border before they come after us. Gus shook his head. William would turn in his grave. William is beyond caring, Gus, and I've spent 3 years honoring a dead man while forgetting to live. Elle mounted her horse with practiced ease, one skill from her Virginia childhood that had never abandoned her. 1 hour, no more, she muttered. She rode toward the fort, staying low in the shadows of the scrub brush. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading one by one. Elle knew the execution would be prepared as dawn approached. Time was running out. The east gate stood partly open, a lone sentry leaning against the wall. Elle had timed her approach to coincide with the changing of the guard, counting on the brief confusion. Her heart pounded in her chest as she dismounted and led her horse along the outer wall, searching for her chance. Inside the fort, she could hear the movement of men preparing for the grim task ahead. A wagon creaked nearby, likely being readied for the execution. Elle closed her eyes briefly, steadying her nerves. When a second soldier appeared, calling to the sentry, Elle slipped through the gate, her head down, the wide-brimmed hat shadowing her face. She led her horse directly toward the adobe storage building, where Kade was held, moving with purpose to avoid drawing suspicion. The lone guard outside the prison was dozing at his post. Elle approached quietly, her husband's pistol now in her hand. "Soldier," she said softly. The man jerked awake, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon before he took in the fine horse and respectable-looking rider. "Ma'am, this area is restricted." Elle raised the pistol, her voice cold. "I have no desire to harm you, but I will if necessary." The guard's eyes widened as he recognized her. "Mrs. Hayes, what in heaven's name—" He hesitated. "The keys, please. And your sidearm. You can't be serious." The guard glanced around for help, but the pre-dawn bustle was focused on the gallows being set up across the parade ground. "I've never been more serious in my life." Elle said, her tone unyielding. She cocked the pistol. "Give me the keys, now." Something in her expression convinced him. Slowly he removed the ring of keys from his belt and handed them over along with his pistol. "Inside," Elle ordered. "Hands where I can see them." Once inside the stifling building, Elle moved quickly to Kade's cell. The Apache warrior sat cross-legged on the floor, his wrists and ankles bound in chains. He showed no surprise at her appearance. "I wondered if you would come," he said simply. Stand back from the door, Elle instructed, finding the right key with trembling fingers. As the cell door swung open, she entered cautiously, keeping the pistol trained on him more from nervousness than actual fear. I can't free you from these chains here, she said. We need to move quickly. They're preparing the gallows. Kade rose gracefully despite his bonds. Why are you doing this? The question caught Elle off guard. I don't know, she admitted. Perhaps because it's wrong to execute a man without trial. Perhaps because I'm tired of watching this territory destroy itself with hatred. A hint of a smile touched Kade's lips. Or perhaps because you recognize something in me that you've lost in yourself. Elle didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the guard who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes. I'm sorry for this, she told him sincerely. Using the rope, she had brought Elle bound and gagged the guard, leaving him propped against the wall. Someone will find you when they come for the prisoner. They'll hang you for this. The guard managed his voice thick with disbelief before she secured the gag. Perhaps Elle replied, her tone steady, but not today. Leading Kade outside, Elle helped him mount her horse despite his chains, then swung up behind him. The arrangement was awkward and proper even, but propriety had been abandoned the moment she made this decision. She lowered her head, whispering, urging the horse forward at a slow walk, still hoping to avoid detection. They were almost at the exit when a shout rang out across the parade ground. The prisoner stopped them. Elle abandoned caution, digging her heels into the horse's flanks. The animal leaped forward, nearly unseating them both as it galloped through the gate and into the open desert beyond. Gunshots rang out behind them, but distance and the dimming light made their aim wild. Elle bent low over the horse's neck, feeling Kade do the same in front of her, his bound hands gripping the saddle horn. They rode hard toward the dry wash where Gus waited. The driver's face showed disbelief as they approached, but he asked no questions. He simply helped Kade onto the second horse. The border is 2 days' ride south, Elle told Gus. Return to town. If anyone asks, I forced you to help at gunpoint. Gus shook his head. They'll never believe that. Tell them I've gone mad with grief. It's what they'll think anyway. Elle reached for Gus's hand. Thank you for everything. With that, she spurred her horse southward, Kade beside her on the second mount. Behind them, the fort had erupted into activity. She could see riders already assembling for pursuit. We need to reach the foothills before they organize properly, Elle called to Kade. Can you ride with those chains? Elle asked. Better than most white men without them, Kade replied, his seat solid, despite his bonds. They rode hard for an hour, the sun climbing higher in the sky and baking the desert floor. Elle's throat burned with thirst, but she dared not stop until they reached the rocky terrain ahead. Finally, in a narrow canyon between jagged outcroppings, Elle reined in her exhausted horse. We need to free you from those chains. Dismounting, she retrieved a small hammer and chisel from her saddlebag. The tools had once belonged to Jace, part of his geological specimen collection, but today they would serve a different purpose. Kade sat patiently as Elle worked on the locks of his manacles. Her brow furrowed in concentration. The close proximity made her acutely aware of him. The scent of his skin, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the lean strength of his arms. When the last chain fell away, Kade rubbed his wrists, studying her with those piercing eyes. You surprise me, Elle Hayes. I surprise myself, Elle admitted, packing away the tools. I've never broken the law before today. You've broken more than the law, Kade observed, glancing meaningfully at her attire, her husband's clothes long preserved, now covered in desert dust. You've broken with your past. Elle couldn't deny it. The proper widow of Jace Hayes had ceased to exist the moment she pointed a pistol at a U.S. soldier. There could be no return to Tucson now, no resumption of her carefully ordered life. We should keep moving, she said, avoiding his gaze. Captain Zane will have patrols searching every trail. Not the way we're going, Kade said, taking the reins of his horse. I know paths the bluecoats have never found. For the first time, doubt crept into Elle's mind. She was now completely dependent on this man. This warrior she knew only as her country's enemy. What if the stories were true? What if he was the ruthless killer Zane had described? She had acted on instinct, on principle, maybe even on attraction, but now reality loomed before her. Having second thoughts, Kade asked, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy, "Wouldn't you in my position?" He inclined his head. "A fair question," Elle said, swallowing. "But consider this. I could have taken this horse and left you the moment those chains fell away." He extended his hand. "I give you my word as Kade of the Chiricahua Apache that no harm will come to you." Elle hesitated for only a moment before she took his hand. His grip was firm, calloused from a life far removed from drawing-room comforts. "We need to reach my people," Kade continued. "After that, I will ensure you reach the Mexican border safely, if that's still your wish." "Your people." Elle swallowed hard. "You're taking me to Chief Kade's camp. It is the only safe place now. The army will be watching all roads to the border." Kade's expression softened slightly. "You've shown great courage, Elle Hayes. Now you must trust me as I trusted you with my life." What choice did she have? Elle nodded, remounting her horse. "Lead on, then." Kade guided them deeper into the foothills, following trails invisible to Elle's untrained eye. By midday, the heat had become unforgiving. Elle's lips cracked from thirst, her fair skin burning, despite the wide-brimmed hat shading her face. They stopped briefly by a hidden spring to water the horses and refill their canteens. As Elle drank gratefully, Kade scanned the horizon. "Riders," he said suddenly, his voice sharp. "At least 6 moving fast." Elle squinted, but saw nothing. "How can you tell?" "Dust pattern," he replied. "Too organized for wild horses." He motioned for her to mount. "We must hurry." They rode hard through the afternoon, climbing steadily into rougher terrain. Elle's body ached from the unfamiliar exertion, but she kept her discomfort to herself. This was her choice after all. As evening approached, bringing welcome relief from the heat, Kade led them into a narrow ravine that wound between towering rock walls. "We'll stop here for the night," he said. "The horses need rest." Elle dismounted stiffly, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. Kade caught her elbow, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "You ride well for a town woman," he observed. "I grew up in Virginia," Elle replied. "Horses were part of daily life." She straightened, reclaiming her composure. "Though I haven't ridden like this since I was a girl." They made camp in a small sheltered hollow between boulders. No fire too risky with patrols out searching, but Kade produced dried meat and hard biscuits from a cache hidden within the rocks. "You've been here before," Elle realized. Kade nodded. "Many times. These mountains hold the history of my people, and our future, if we're allowed one." As darkness fell, the desert's chill replaced the heat of the day. Elle shivered in her thin shirt, having packed for speed, not comfort. Without a word, Kade removed the light blanket from his horse's saddle and offered it to her. "Thank you." Elle wrapped it around her shoulders, breathing in his scent embedded in the rough fabric. "May I ask you something?" He settled cross-legged across from her. "Ask." "Captain Zane says your people massacred the Franklin family, women and children." Elle met his gaze steadily. "Is it true?" Kade's expression darkened. "The Franklin massacre was not our doing. Renegade Mexicans killed that family." He continued, his voice bitter. "Then left Apache arrows to cast blame. But the army doesn't care for truth, only for excuses to drive us from our lands." "You're saying the raids attributed to Chief Kade?" Elle trailed off. "Some are ours," Kade acknowledged. "We fight to survive. But many atrocities blamed on us were committed by others. bandits, renegades, even white men disguised as Apache. He studied her face. Does this change your mind about helping me? Elle thought for a moment. She had no way to verify his claims, yet somehow she believed him. No. The principle remains the same, she said. Execution without trial is wrong, regardless of guilt or innocence. Kade's lips curved slightly. A woman of principle, rare in any people. Not principle alone, Elle admitted. There's something else. When our eyes met that day on the road, I can't explain it. Recognition, Kade said simply. Two spirits who refuse to be conquered. The night deepened around them, the stars emerging in brilliant profusion. Elle had never seen the sky so clear, so vast, away from the lights of town and the confines of rooms. What does your name mean? Elle asked, drawn to know more about the man who had turned her world upside down. Kade means, he who wrestles. Condemns, he replied. A shadow crossed his features. Though it's not my true name. What is your true name? Elle asked, her voice low. He hesitated, then said quietly, Kai. Elle's breath caught. Your chief Kai, the one they've been hunting. Kade inclined his head. I am called that, yes. Though chief is your word, not ours. I lead my people because they choose to follow me. Elle felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. The notorious Apache leader, the man whose name was whispered in fear throughout the territory she had freed him. The implications were staggering. You lied to me, she said, her voice unsteady. I did not. The soldiers called me Kade. I answered to that name. They didn't recognize me. His expression remained calm. Would you have helped me if you had known? He asked, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy. Elle considered the question honestly. I don't know. Kai, not Kade, he said, studying her in silence. You should rest. Tomorrow will be another hard day's ride. As Elle settled against a boulder, the blanket pulled tight around her sleep eluded her. She had freed the most wanted man in the Arizona territory. Captain Zane would never stop hunting them now. Yet beneath her fear there was something else, a strange exhilaration. For years Elle had merely existed, moving through each day like a ghost. But now, with every crunch of gravel beneath their horses' hooves, and every glimpse of Kade's profile against the vast desert sky, her heart raced. She had traded safety for danger, predictability for uncertainty, and she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Dawn broke in a riot of color across the eastern horizon. Elle woke to find Kade already, preparing the horses, his movements efficient and silent. How far to your people? She asked, folding the blanket. We'll reach them by nightfall if we ride hard. Kade handed her a canteen. The soldiers lost our trail yesterday, but they'll find it again. Zane's a skilled tracker. The mention of Zane sent a chill through Elle. He'll never stop hunting you now, or me. No, Kade agreed. Your life in Tucson is over, Elle Hayes. Do you regret your choice? Elle asked, meeting his gaze directly. Would you if our positions were reversed? The question seemed to surprise him. After a moment, his stern features softened into something like a smile. No, I would not. They rode through increasingly rugged terrain, the horses carefully picking their way along narrow trails that clung to steep hillsides. By midday, they had climbed high enough that Elle could look back and see the vast desert stretching toward Tucson, now hidden beyond the horizon. It's beautiful, she murmured, seeing the landscape with new eyes. What had once seemed barren now revealed its stark majesty. The play of light and shadow across stone formations. The unexpected green of desert plants, the vastness of the sky meeting the earth. This is holy land, Kade told her, following her gaze. The spirits of my ancestors dwell in these mountains, yet your government would drive us into reservation lands, far from here, barren places where nothing grows. I didn't know, Elle said simply. Few of your people, Care to know? Kade replied, his tone neither accusatory nor angry, just matter of fact. They see only land to be claimed, minerals to be mined, cattle to be grazed. And what do you see when you look at my people? Elle asked. Kade paused, considering the question. I see a great storm that sweeps across the land, changing everything in its path. Some of us will survive this storm by bending like the willow. Others will break. Which are you? Elle asked, searching his face. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable. I have not yet decided. As the late afternoon shadows stretched across the mountainside, Kade suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Before Elle could ask why, a bird call echoed from the rocks above. Then another answered by Kade with a similar call. 3 Apache warriors materialized from the landscape, armed with rifles far newer than any Elle had ever seen. They eyed her with open suspicion, speaking rapidly to Kade in their language. Elle sat tall in her saddle, refusing to show fear despite the wild beating of her heart. These men had every reason to hate her people, but she had committed herself to this path. After a brief exchange, Kade turned to her. We're being escorted to the camp. Stay close to me. The hidden encampment lay in a sheltered valley, invisible until they were nearly upon it. Elle counted perhaps 30 lodges, which Kade called wickiups, constructed of branches and brush. Women moved about preparing evening meals. Children played under watchful eyes. Old men sat in the shade conversing. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Everyone stopped to watch as Kade led Elle through the camp, whispers following in their wake. They're afraid of me, Elle observed quietly. They're curious, Kade corrected. Few have seen a white woman this close. Fewer still have seen one dressed as a man. Elle became acutely aware of her masculine attire, now dusty and sweat-stained from 2 days of hard riding. She must look a sight, but she felt more authentic in these clothes than she had in 3 years of widow's weeds. Kade dismounted before a larger wickiup, helping Elle down from her horse. His hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, sending an unexpected warmth through her, despite her exhaustion. An elderly woman emerged from the dwelling. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were sharp and alert. She embraced Kade, speaking rapidly, her hands touching his face as if assuring herself that he was unharmed. My grandmother, Kade explained to Elle. She welcomes you to our camp. The old woman approached Elle, studying her with unabashed curiosity. After a moment, she spoke directly to her in heavily accented English. You freed my grandson. Why, Elle glanced at Kade, surprised by the directness of the question. Because it was right, she answered simply. And because something told me I must. The old woman nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. You will stay in my lodge tonight. Come. Inside the wickiup, Elle found it surprisingly spacious and comfortable, with woven mats covering the floor and sleeping pallets arranged around a central space. The old woman, Kade called her Sika, provided her with a dress made of soft deerskin and discreetly turned away while Elle changed. The sensation of the supple leather against her skin was foreign but not unpleasant. After 2 days in men's clothing, the dress felt strangely freeing. You must be hungry, Sika said, offering a wooden bowl filled with a fragrant stew. Thank you. Elle accepted it gratefully. Your English is very good, she remarked. I lived at the mission school for 3 years as a girl, the old woman explained, her weathered face creasing into a smile. Before I escaped, like you, I ran from one life to another. I didn't plan to run, Elle admitted. It just happened. Such things always just happen, Sika observed with surprising humor. The heart decides before the head knows. After eating, Elle stepped outside the lodge to find Kade deep in conversation with several warriors. When he saw her in the Apache dress, something flickered in his eyes. Appreciation, perhaps, or simple surprise. He excused himself from the men and approached her. The dress suits you, Kade remarked. Your grandmother is kind, Elle replied, oddly flustered by his attention. What happens now? Kade's expression grew serious. Now we prepare. Zane will not give up easily. He's requested reinforcements from Fort Bowie. At least 50 soldiers will join the hunt. Because of me, Elle said, the weight of her actions settling heavily on her shoulders. Because of us, Kade corrected. My capture was a prize. My escape is an embarrassment they cannot tolerate. He studied her face in the fading light. Do you wish to continue to the Mexican border? I'll arrange escorts. The question caught Elle off guard. She hadn't considered what came next. She hadn't thought beyond the immediate need to free Kade, now revealed as the man they had been hunting. I don't know, Elle admitted. I have no life waiting for me in Mexico. Nor can you return to Tucson, Kade reminded her gently. Elle looked around the encampment at the life so different from anything she had ever known. Is there a third choice? Kade's gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them. Perhaps, he said slowly, but not one you should make in haste. Before Elle could ask what he meant, a commotion arose from the edge of camp. A warrior rode in, at speed, calling out in Apache. Kade's expression hardened as he listened. What is it? Elle asked. Soldiers, Kade replied grimly. A patrol too close for comfort. We must move camp tonight. The encampment transformed with practiced efficiency. Women dismantled wiki-ups while men gathered horses and supplies. Children helped without complaint, understanding the gravity of the situation. Can I help? Elle asked, feeling useless amid the activity. Sika pressed a bundle into her arms. Carry this, stay close to me. Within an hour, the valley stood empty. All traces of habitation were carefully erased. The band moved silently through the darkness, following paths known only to them. Ella walked beside Sika, aware of Kade moving among his people, giving quiet instructions. They traveled through the night, resting briefly before dawn. Ella's feet ached in the soft moccasins Sika had provided. Her muscles protested after days of riding, followed by miles of walking. Yet she made no complaint, understanding that survival depended on this journey. As the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, they reached their destination. A hidden canyon accessible only through a narrow passage between towering rock walls. Inside, a stream provided fresh water, and overhanging cliffs offered natural shelter. We will be safe here for a time, Kade told her as the band began establishing their new camp. Few white men know of this place. How long can you keep moving like this? Elle asked, troubled by the hardship she witnessed, especially among the elderly and children. Kade's expression was grim. Not indefinitely. The reservations press in from all sides. Game grows scarce. The old ways are dying. He looked at her directly. You've seen how we live, Elle Hayes. We are not the savages your newspapers describe. No, she agreed softly. You're not. That night, as the camp settled into uneasy sleep, Elle sat outside Sika's newly erected wiki-up, gazing at the stars. Her old life seemed impossibly distant now, like a story she had read rather than lived. She sensed rather than heard Kade approach, his movements silent, even on the rocky ground. He settled beside her, offering a blanket against the night's chill. You should rest, he said. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. I keep thinking about choices, Elle replied. 3 days ago I was a respectable widow arranging bank loans. Now I'm a fugitive living among Apache. Do you regret it? That's the strangest part, Elle admitted. I don't. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, I feel more alive than I have in years. She turned to face him in the darkness. Is that madness? Elle asked, her voice barely a whisper, as she glanced at Kade. He was silent for a long moment before answering. My people believe each spirit has its true path. Kade said slowly. Some find it easily. Others must journey far and face many trials before discovering where they belong. And you think this is my path? Elle's voice trembled slightly, but her defiance remained strong. Running from the law with a wanted Apache chief. Kade's low chuckle surprised her. I think your path is still revealing itself, Elle Hayes. Just as mine is. Under the moonlight, his features were cast in a mix of silver and shadow, emphasizing the strength of his face. Elle found herself studying him, no longer concerned with the usual boundaries of propriety. May I ask you something? Elle said, her voice soft but clear. Ask. At the fort you said you recognized something in me. What was it? Kade considered her question carefully before answering. Fire! He finally said, his voice low. Banked beneath ash and duty, but still burning. He looked at her directly, his gaze intense. I recognized it because I carry the same fire. The word hit Elle deep, naming the restlessness that had plagued her even before Jace's death, the sense that her life had become a performance, something to satisfy others rather than an authentic expression of herself. Jace never really knew me, Elle confessed, her voice raw. He saw what he wanted to see, a proper Virginia lady, grateful for his protection. And I became that woman, because it was safer than being myself. And who is yourself, Elle Hayes? Kade's question hung between them, intimate, challenging. Elle turned her gaze toward the vast canopy of stars above them. She felt both insignificant and at the same time vividly present. I'm not entirely sure, she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. But I think I'm beginning to find out. Kade's hand found hers in the darkness, his touch tentative at first, then firmer, as her fingers intertwined with his. They sat in silence, the simple contact speaking more than words ever could. As dawn approached, the distant sound of horses echoed too many for hunting, too purposeful for travelers. Elle woke to find the camp already alert. Warriors stood watch at the canyon's entrance, while women hurriedly gathered essential supplies. Kade appeared at the entrance of their wickiup, his expression grave. Army patrol, he said, his voice low. At least 20 men moving this way. How did they find us? Elle asked hastily, slipping into the deerskin dress. A tracker from the San Carlos reservation guides them, one who knows these mountains as well as we do. Kade handed her a water skin. The old ones and children are being moved deeper into the canyon. I need you to go. It's too dangerous for your people. I won't hide while others face it, Elle replied, standing tall, despite the fear rising within her. This isn't about courage, Kade said firmly. If the soldiers capture you, Zane will use you to draw me out. I cannot risk that. The logic was sound, but something within Elle rebelled at being treated as a liability that of an ally. Before she could argue further, Sika appeared, motioning urgently. Go with my grandmother, Kade insisted. Please. He said, his voice soft, a word so unexpected from the proud warrior it nearly undid her. Elle nodded reluctantly. Be careful. She told him, the inadequacy of the words aching in her chest. Kade touched her face briefly, the gesture so gentle it nearly shattered her composure. Find me when this is over. Then without another word, he was gone, moving silently toward the canyon entrance with his warriors. Sika tugged at Ella's arm, leading her in the opposite direction, deeper into the winding passage where the other non-combatants were gathering. The next few hours passed in agonizing tension. Occasionally the distant sound of gunfire reached them, but the echoes from the canyon walls distorted the sounds, making it impossible to tell who had the advantage. The Apache women kept outwardly calm, though Elle could see the concern in their eyes, the way mothers held their children close. They fought such battles before, Sika told her, seeming to read Elle's thoughts. Does it get easier? The old woman's eyes, full of ancient wisdom, met hers. Nothing that matters ever gets easier. We simply grow stronger. By midday, A young boy appeared at their hiding place, speaking rapidly in Apache. The women immediately began gathering their belongings. "What's happening?" Elle asked Sika. "The soldiers retreat for now, but more will come." Sika said, her voice calm despite the urgency. "We must move further into the mountains." "And Kade?" Elle's voice trembled with worry. "He lives," Sika assured her, though her eyes darkened. "2 of our warriors have fallen." The band moved through the rest of the day, following game trails deeper into the wilderness. Elle walked beside Sika, helping the older woman over difficult terrain, ignoring her own exhaustion. As dusk fell, Elle helped gather firewood, now moving with the group rather than just following. Kade and his warriors rejoined them as night descended, their faces grim, but their movements steady. "No serious injuries," Kade reported to the others, though all bore the marks of hard fighting. Elle watched him confer with the other men, noticing how they deferred to him without subservience, respect earned rather than demanded. His leadership was unlike anything she had seen in Tucson's structured hierarchical society. Later, as the camp settled into watchful rest, Kade found Elle sitting alone by a small fire. "You fought well today," she said simply. He settled beside her with a weary sigh. "We fought enough to live another day, nothing more." "What happens tomorrow and the day after that?" Elle asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Kade stared into the flames, his expression unreadable. "Tomorrow will come and we will fight again." "The same," Kade said, his voice carrying a heavy weight. "We fight, we move, until we can fight and move no more." The bleakness in his voice stirred something protective in Elle. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, surprised when he allowed the contact to linger. "There must be another way," she insisted, her voice soft but determined. "Someplace your people can live in peace." "The reservation," Kade said bitterly. His laugh had no humor in it. "Crowded camps where we depend on government rations that never arrive, where our children die of diseases brought by white men, where our warriors become beggars." He shook his head. "Better to die free in these mountains." Elle couldn't argue with that. She had heard stories of the reservation, stories she had always dismissed as exaggerations, until now. "What about Mexico?" she suggested. "Could your people cross the border?" "Some Apache bands have found refuge there," Kade admitted. "But the Mexican army hunts us as eagerly as yours." Kade's gaze locked onto hers. "And what about you, Elle Hayes? What future do you see for yourself now?" The question caught her off guard. Elle had been living moment to moment since their escape, never stopping to think of what came next. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice small. "I can't return to Tucson. My reputation is destroyed. My assets are probably seized by now." "You regret helping me?" Kade asked, withdrawing his hand. "No," Elle said quickly, surprising them both with the vehemence of her reply. "I regret nothing. These past days, despite the danger, despite the hardship, I've felt more alive than I have in all my years of widowhood." Something shifted in Kade's expression, a flicker of understanding, or maybe something more. "Why did you marry him?" Kade asked, his voice low. Elle froze, the question hitting her harder than she expected. No one had ever asked her that before. Her marriage to Jace had always been seen as fortunate, advantageous. No explanation was needed. "Security," she finally said, her voice quiet. "My father lost everything after the war. Jace offered safety for me and for my family." She stared into the flames. "I was 17, he was 37. At the time it seemed like a fair exchange." "Was there love between you?" Kade asked, his eyes fixed on her, waiting for an honest answer. Elle considered the question carefully. "There was respect, affection of a kind. Jace was never cruel, but love." She shook her head. "No, not the kind that consumes." Not the kind that burns. Kade's eyes reflected the firelight, dark and unreadable. And now, what kind of love would you seek if you could choose freely? Elle felt heat rise to her face, and it had nothing to do with the nearby flames. I made a vow at Jace's grave, she said, her voice catching. No more love, no more vulnerability. Vows made to the dead only bind if we choose to honor them, Kade observed. The question remains, what does Elle Hayes want, now that she is truly free to choose? The question hung between them, thick with unspoken possibilities. Elle found herself unable to look away from his gaze, the heat between them palpable like the desert sun itself. I want, she began, but faltered. Before she could find the words, shouts erupted from the edge of camp. Warriors rushed toward the disturbance, and Kade was immediately on his feet. Stay here, he commanded, disappearing into the darkness. Elle waited anxiously, straining to hear what was happening. Minutes later, Kade returned with several warriors, escorting a ragged, exhausted Apache man who collapsed beside the fire. The newcomer spoke rapidly in Apache, his words causing visible distress among the listeners. Elle looked to Kade for explanation. Soldiers attacked our sister band near Apache Pass, Kade translated grimly. Women and children massacred. No warning, no provocation. Elle's heart sank. That can't be. The army wouldn't, would they? Kade's voice was cold, his face hard. It has happened before. It will happen again until no Apache remains to tell the tale. The messenger continued his story, occasionally breaking down in sobs. Elle didn't need translation to understand his grief. He lost his wife and 3 children, Kade told her quietly. He alone escaped, to bring warning. Elle felt sick. This wasn't the civilized warfare she had imagined. This was extermination, and her own people were responsible. I'm sorry, she whispered, her words hopelessly inadequate. Kade didn't respond, his attention focused on the growing crowd of his people gathering to hear the news. Elle watched their faces transform from shock to grief to rage. Women wailed in mourning while men spoke in increasingly heated tones. When Kade finally addressed them, his voice carried authority, quieting even the most agitated. Elle couldn't understand his words, but she recognized the cadence, the way he channeled their anger, not to fuel it, but to direct it, providing clarity and purpose amid chaos. The gathering slowly began to disperse, people returning to their fires with a renewed sense of purpose in their movements. What did you tell them? Elle asked when Kade returned to her side. That we'll move at first light. Kade replied, his tone resolute. Not deeper into the mountains, but south toward the border. His expression was hard, like stone carved by years of hardship. This is no longer just about survival, he continued. It's about saving what remains of our people. Elle furrowed her brow. The border crossing will be watched, especially now. Yes, which is why we need a distraction. Kade said, his eyes studying her face in the dim firelight. I have a plan, but it requires your help and your courage. Whatever you need, Elle replied without hesitation. Kade explained his strategy. While the main group traveled a hidden trail toward the border, a smaller group, including Kade and Elle, would create a diversion to draw the army's attention eastward. They'll be watching for a white woman traveling with Apache, Kade concluded. We will give them what they expect to see, just not where they expect to see it. The risk was enormous, but the logic was sound. Elle's stomach twisted with fear, but she knew there was no other choice. To wish us rest, Kade said when the plans were finalized, his voice low. Tomorrow will test us all. As Elle prepared to return to Sika's wiki-up, Kade caught her hand. His voice softened. Elle. He said her name like a promise. If things go wrong tomorrow, he began, but she cut him off. They won't, she interrupted, unwilling to entertain the thought of failure. If they do, Kade persisted, know that you've earned the respect of my people, and more than respect from me. The simple declaration hit her like a rush of warmth, flooding through her chest. Before she could respond, Kade leaned forward and kissed her. At first it was gentle, almost tentative. Then as she responded, it grew deeper, more intense. It wasn't like the dutiful kisses from Jace. This was fire and promise, danger and hope, all contained in the press of lips and mingling of breath. When they finally pulled away, Elle felt transformed, as if something deep inside her had awakened. "I broke my vow," she whispered, not in regret, but in wonder. Kade traced her cheek with his finger. Some vows are meant to be broken so new ones can be made. In that moment, with death looming over them both, Elle made a new promise to herself to live fully, to love fearlessly, for however many days remained to her. Dawn arrived clear and cold. The camp dismantled with practiced efficiency, each member of the group understanding the gravity of their situation. Elle dressed in her original riding clothes, now mended by Sika. The widow of Jace Hayes would make one final appearance. Kade approached as she finished preparing his warriors, already mounted nearby. "Are you ready?" Elle squared her shoulders and nodded. "I am." Sika embraced her before Elle mounted, pressing something into her hand, a small amulet on a leather cord. "For protection," Sika said. "Return to us, daughter." The word daughter caught Elle off guard, and unexpected tears filled her eyes. She slipped the cord around her neck, tucking the amulet beneath her shirt. "I will," she promised. The main group left first, moving south through hidden valleys, while Kade's smaller band headed east deliberately, leaving signs for the soldiers to follow. Elle rode beside Kade, 6 warriors surrounding them as they traveled through increasingly open terrain. By midday, they had reached the foothills overlooking a broad desert plain. Kade raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Dust to the north," he announced, his voice low. "Cavalry patrol." Elle squinted against the harsh sunlight. "How many?" "At least 15, maybe more." Kade's expression was calculating. "We've been seen. Now we run," he said, his voice firm, but not too quickly. The next few hours were a carefully orchestrated chase. Kade led them on a winding path, staying just ahead of the soldiers, drawing them further eastward, away from the main group's southern route. By late afternoon, however, the situation grew more precarious. 2 more patrols had joined the pursuit, and their numbers were overwhelming. Kade's group found themselves pushed toward a box canyon with limited escape routes. "This isn't working," Elle said as they paused briefly to water the horses. "They're hurting us, not following." Kade nodded grimly. "Captain Zane leads them. He knows these mountains better than I expected." The sound of approaching horses decided them. They rode hard for the canyon's entrance, hoping to reach the narrow trail that wound up its eastern wall. But as they rounded the final bend, Elle's heart sank. Soldiers blocked the path ahead. They had been outflanked. Kade signaled his warriors to spread out, creating a defensive line. "When I give the word," he told Elle, "ride for that ravine to the south. It may still be clear." "I won't leave you," Elle protested, her voice fierce. "This isn't about us anymore," Kade replied, his tone hardening. "It's about my people reaching the border. If we're both captured, Zane wins completely. If one of us escapes, there's still hope." Before Elle could argue further, gunfire erupted from the ridge above them. 2 of Kade's warriors fell immediately, the others returning fire while seeking cover among the rocks. "Go," Kade shouted, pushing Elle's horse toward the ravine. Now torn between loyalty and logic, Elle hesitated only for a moment before urging her horse forward. Behind her, the gunfight raged on. She glanced back to see Kade steady and unflinching, covering her retreat, even as bullets kicked up dust around him. Elle had nearly reached the ravine's entrance when a sharp, searing pain shot through her upper arm. The impact nearly threw her from the saddle, but she clung to her horse, pushing forward into the narrow pass. The wound burned like wildfire. Blood soaked her sleeve as she urged her mount deeper into the ravine. Behind her, the gunfire began to fade. Either the fight was dying down, or she had moved far enough to be beyond hearing. The ravine twisted sharply, then opened into a small canyon, hemmed in by sheer walls, a dead end. Elle pulled her panicked horse to a halt, fighting the dizziness from blood loss and fear. She had to turn back, had to help Kade. But as she spun her horse around, the sound of approaching riders echoed through the ravine. Trapped. Elle drew her husband's pistol with her uninjured arm, determined not to go down without a fight. She pressed herself against a boulder, using it as cover, as the riders appeared at the canyon's mouth. The voice of Captain Zane Reed rang out, clear and strong. "Throw down your weapon. It's over." Elle stayed silent, counting the soldiers as they fanned out. At least 10, maybe more, too many to take on. Zane dismounted, his hands raised in a gesture of caution. "You're wounded, Elle. Let us help you." "Where's Kade?" she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. Zane's face hardened. "The Apache chief is dead, Elle. Along with his warriors. It's over." The words hit like physical blows. Elle sank against the boulder, the weight of the pistol suddenly too much to hold. Kade couldn't be dead. Not after everything. Not when they had only just found each other. "I don't believe you," she shouted back, though doubt lingered in her voice. "Believe what you will," Zane replied, "but your situation remains the same. Surrender now, and I'll make sure you get medical care and a fair trial. Keep this madness going, and I can't promise you'll make it out alive." Elle's mind raced. If Kade was truly gone, what was there left to fight for? But Zane's manner made her suspicious. He was too confident, too eager for her to surrender. "Show me proof," she demanded. "Proof that Kade is dead." Zane hesitated, then signaled his men. 2 soldiers briefly disappeared, returning with something draped across a horse, a body wrapped in a blanket. Satisfied, Zane called, "Now throw down your weapon, Elle. Don't add to the bloodshed." Her vision blurred with tears and pain. If that was really Kade, if she had lost him after finding such an unexpected connection, maybe surrender was the only way. But as she wavered, a bird call echoed from the canyon rim, a distinctive pattern, one she had heard before among the Apache. Elle's gaze shot up, scanning the rock and sky, but the call came again, unmistakable. The signal. Understanding flooded her. Whether Kade was alive or not, his people needed time. Time to reach the border. Time to escape their doomed fate. Elle straightened, determination replacing the despair. "Captain Zane," she called, her voice clear, "I wish to negotiate the terms of my surrender." Zane visibly relaxed, signaling for his men to lower their weapons. "There are no negotiations, Elle. You've aided the enemies of the United States. The penalty is clear." "Nevertheless," Elle replied, "I will speak with you alone before I surrender." Zane considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Keep your men back," he ordered, stepping closer to Elle's position. As he drew near, Elle let him see her wound. A bloody gash along her upper arm, worse than it seemed. Zane's expression softened as he saw the injury. "You need a doctor," he said, reaching for the pistol still gripped tightly in her hand. "Let me help you," he offered. Elle reluctantly let go of the weapon, her body swaying slightly. "The Apache chief," she asked, her voice low, "is he truly dead?" "Yes," Zane answered, supporting her with one arm. "Though his body disappeared in the firefight, these savages often retrieve their dead." The lie confirmed Elle's suspicions. She leaned more heavily against Zane, pretending to be overcome by her wound, while her eyes scanned the canyon rim. There, a flash of movement against the stone. Elle forced herself to stay focused on Zane, keeping his attention on her. "William would be so disappointed in me," she murmured, playing the role Zane expected. The foolish widow led astray, now returning to her senses. Zane mused. "William was a good man," he agreed. "He would understand that you were coerced. Manipulated by that Apache. We'll make sure the judge knows that too." "You're very kind, Captain," Elle replied, her voice dripping with feigned gratitude. Reed's arm tightened around Elle's waist, the touch shifting from protective to possessive. "I've always admired you, Elle," he said, his voice low, like a man who believed he could command her fate. "Even before Jace passed, this unfortunate episode need not define your future." The implication hung heavy between them. Reed saw himself as her savior, her protector. The thought made Elle's skin crawl, but she forced a tremulous smile. "You give me hope, Captain." As Reed guided her toward the waiting soldiers, movement erupted from the canyon rim. Apache warriors emerged, materializing from the shadows of the stone rifles aimed and ready. Kade's voice rang out, carrying across the canyon with deadly authority. "Drop your weapons or die where you stand." Reed's grip on Elle turned bruising as he yanked her against him, his pistol suddenly pressed to her temple. "Order your savages to stand down, or I'll put a bullet in her head." Elle's heart raced, but her relief flooded her when she heard Kade's voice. He was alive, and he had come for her, despite the risk. "You would kill an unarmed, injured woman, Captain." Elle called out, her voice steady and clear in the canyon's acoustics. "How very civilized of you." Reed's hand trembled with fury against her skin. "Tell them to stand down," he demanded, his voice tight with rage. From the canyon rim, Kade called down in English, "Release her, and your men may leave with their lives. Otherwise, none of you will see another dawn." Elle could see the conflict in Reed's eyes. His men were exposed, trapped in a deadly crossfire from above. Even if he killed her, they would still die. "Captain," one of the soldiers ventured nervously, "we're sitting ducks here." "Quiet," Reed snapped, but his command lacked its usual authority. The damage was done. His control was slipping, and with it his advantage. Elle seized the moment. "You've lost, Captain. There's no shame in saving your men's lives." For a terrible moment, she felt Reed's finger tighten on the trigger, the desperate rage that fueled him as his prize slipped away. Then with a curse, he shoved her roughly to the ground. "Lower your weapons," he ordered his men, his voice tight with suppressed fury. The soldiers complied, and within moments, Apache warriors descended into the canyon with swift, sure movements. Kade was among them, his face streaked with battle paint, but very much alive. The soldiers were quickly disarmed, their horses and weapons taken. Reed stood rigid, his eyes fixed on Elle as one of Kade's men helped her to her feet. "This isn't finished, Mrs. Stone," Reed said, his voice low and venomous. "Traitors and Indian lovers hang in this territory." Before Elle could respond, Kade approached, his expression cold and furious as he noted her wounded arm. "You are fortunate I value this woman's opinion, Captain," he said quietly. "She believes in justice rather than revenge. Remember that when you walk away from here alive." Kade turned to Elle, his hard expression softening as he examined her injury. "Can you ride?" She nodded, suddenly dizzy, with both relief and blood loss. "You came back for me." "Always," Kade said simply. The word was a promise stronger than any vow. The soldiers were left afoot, their weapons scattered across the terrain. By the time they reached the fort, Kade assured Elle that the main band would have crossed into Mexico safely. Elle rode double with Kade, her injured arm bandaged and secured against his chest as they traveled. The pain faded beneath the certainty of his presence, solid, alive, unwavering. They rode through the night, pushing southeast toward the border. By dawn, they had crossed into Mexico, the international line marked only by a shift in the landscape, subtle, unnoticed by most. In a sheltered valley not far from the border, they found what they had been seeking, the main Apache band, safely encamped and waiting for news of the diversionary group's fate. The reunion was joyous, especially when Sika embraced Ella with tears of relief. "I knew you would return," the old woman said, examining Elle's bandaged arm with practiced hands. "The spirits told me." That night, as Elle rested in Sika's wickiup, her wound cleaned and dressed, Kade came to her. He sat beside her sleeping mat, his expression unusually uncertain. "You could have died today." he said, his voice low, filled with the weight of the moment. So could you. Elle replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. Yet here we are, Kade said, taking her hand. His calloused fingers were gentle against her skin. The question remains, where do we go from here? My people will move further south away from the border, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his people's plight. There are Apache bands in the Sierra Madre who have maintained their freedom. A hard life. Elle observed, her heart heavy for him. Yes, Kade said, meeting her gaze. Harder than anything you've known. He paused, then spoke again, his words sharp but gentle. You could still return to your world, Elle Hayes, with evidence that you were taken against your will with the right lawyer. Elle's response was immediate and firm. No, she said, her voice steady as the earth beneath her. That world is closed to me now. Even if it weren't the truth, she reached up to trace the strong line of his jaw. I have no desire to go back to a life half lived, she said softly. Kade, his voice low and steady, echoed a conversation they'd had before. What do you desire? This time Elle was ready. This. A life of truth, not appearances. Freedom, not safety, she added, her lips curling into a slight smile. Although I wouldn't mind if safety sometimes came along with freedom. Kade's laughter was warm and rich, filling the space between them. I make no promises about safety, he teased. Then, leaning in closer, his breath mingling with hers, he said, but truth that I can offer in abundance. And their kiss deepened, sparking the fire that had ignited between them from the moment they'd first met on that dusty road. Elle forgot the pain in her arm as she pulled him closer, feeling the final threads of her old life snap away. Later, as they lay together beneath the starlit sky, Kade spoke of their future, of the hidden valleys, deep in the Sierra Madre, where they could build a new life together. He told her of the skills she would need to learn and the challenges they would face side by side. Elle listened, not with fear, but with anticipation. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, but it was theirs to walk together, neither leading nor following, but moving as one. I made a promise at Jace's grave, she whispered, never to love again, never to be vulnerable again. Kade propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face in the soft moonlight. Do you regret breaking that promise? Elle smiled, reaching up to trace the familiar lines of his face, a face that had become more dear to her than any other. How can I regret the promise that freed me? She whispered. Jace belonged to another life, a life where Elle Stone was a proper widow, a respectable woman who never would have ridden into the desert with an Apache warrior. She pressed her palm against Kade's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her touch. That woman died the moment our eyes met on the road to Tucson. What remains is simply me. Kade covered her hand with his touch warm and grounding. And who is this woman who has journeyed so far from home? He asked. A woman who chooses her own path, Elle replied, her voice strong. A woman who has learned that love isn't weakness but strength. A woman who has stopped mourning what was lost and begun celebrating what has been found. Kade's smile, rare and transformative, lit up his face. Then we are well matched, you and I. For I too have found something I thought lost forever. And what is that? Elle asked, her curiosity piqued. Hope, he said simply. Hope for my people. Hope for myself. He brushed his lips against hers, his breath warm and tender. Hope for us. In the days that followed, the band traveled deeper into Mexico, eventually reaching the remote mountains where other Apache groups had established hidden strongholds beyond the reach of both the American and Mexican armies. Elle adapted to her new life with determination and a touch of humor. She learned to erect a wickiup, to gather desert plants for food and medicine, to move silently through the forests and canyons. Sika became her patient teacher, while other women slowly accepted the white woman who had risked everything for their chief. Kade's status among the combined Apache bands grew as word spread of his daring escape and successful border crossing. Leaders from other groups sought his counsel, impressed by his ability to outwit the American army and the fierce loyalty he inspired. 6 months after crossing the border, Elle and Kade were formally joined according to Apache tradition. Their union was celebrated with feasting and dancing that lasted through the night. Ella wore a dress Sika had made for the occasion, crafted from soft deerskin and adorned with intricate beadwork, telling the story of their meeting and escape. As they stood together before the assembled bands, Kade spoke in both Apache and English, honoring both of their traditions. "Two streams have joined to form one river," he declared, his hand holding Elle's. "Two fires have merged to create one flame. What was begun in danger now continues in strength." Elle, no longer the proper widow, but a woman, transformed by love and courage, responded with equal conviction. "I once made a promise never to love again," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Today I make a new promise to love without fear, to live without regret, to walk beside you through whatever path lies ahead." Around them, the mountains stood as eternal witnesses to their vows, not the mountains of Arizona that had first sheltered them, but new peaks, new valleys, new beginnings stretching toward the horizon. Later that night, as they stood alone beneath the vast canopy of stars, Elle leaned against Kade's solid strength, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if our paths had never crossed that day on the road to Tucson?" Kade considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. The Apache believed that some souls are bound to meet regardless of the world's barriers. If not that day, then another. If not in this life, then the next. "So we were inevitable," Elle mused, smiling. "As inevitable as the sunrise." Kade agreed, drawing her closer. "As unstoppable as the spring after winter, as certain as the heart's recognition of its missing half." Elle turned in his arms, facing the man who had awakened her from years of emotional slumber. In his eyes she saw not just passion, but understanding, a recognition of a fellow spirit who had journeyed through loss to find unexpected joy. "I mourned my husband. I buried my heart. I promised never to love again," she whispered against his lips. "And then one look from you set everything on fire." Kade's kiss answered Anna's unspoken words, sealing the bond between them. A kiss that would not be the first and surely not the last, but one that burned with the passion of the moment, a flame that would carry them through the challenges that awaited. In the years that followed, Elle Hayes, once the respectable widow of Tucson, became a living legend. A figure whispered about around campfires, both among the Apache and the settlers along the border. Stories were told of the white woman who had ridden beside Chief Kade, a woman who had chosen love over the safety of the known truth over the demands of society, the uncharted path over the well-worn road. Some called her a traitor, others a fool in love, but those who truly knew her understood the woman behind the legend. They saw that Elle had only found the courage to follow her heart, a heart that had been yearning for freedom long before it met Kade. And in doing so, Elle had not only broken the promise she had made in her grief, but she had fulfilled a greater one, the promise of a life fully lived, a heart fully open, a love that defied the boundaries of race and culture, to forge something rare and beautiful in a world too often divided by hatred and fear. For Elle and Kade, it was enough. More than enough, it was everything. As our story draws to a close, dear listener, I ask you to stay with me for just a moment longer. Elle's journey from widow to warrior reminds us all that it's never too late to rewrite our own stories. At 25, Elle thought her path was set, defined by lost duty and promises made in the shadow of grief. But one unexpected meeting changed everything. Many of us, especially as we approach our later years, may feel like our most vibrant days are behind us. Society often pushes this notion, suggesting that adventure, passion, and transformation belong only to the young, but Elle's story whispers a deeper truth. The human heart does not know the limits of age or circumstance. It remains capable of extraordinary courage, unexpected joy, and yes, even passionate love, no matter the years. Perhaps you've made promises to your past. Maybe you've built a life of comfort and predictability to keep pain at bay, but in doing so you've walled out possibility. Elle's journey asks us to question that. What fires still burn beneath the surface of our carefully ordered lives? What wild, beautiful potential awaits us if we dare to step beyond the boundaries we've set for ourselves? This doesn't mean we need to abandon everything for a life in this wilderness. But perhaps it means allowing ourselves one small act of courage each day, reaching for connection instead of isolation, choosing authenticity over appearance, pursuing a long-lost passion, or simply letting ourselves feel deeply again. The frontier that Elle and Kade navigated wasn't just the rugged Arizona territory, but the wild, untamed landscape of the human heart where fear and love, caution and courage, duty and desire wage an eternal battle. This frontier exists within each of us, regardless of age or circumstance. As you lay your head down to sleep tonight, carry this gentle thought with you. It's never too late to break promises that no longer serve you. It's never too late to recognize the fire that still burns within. And it's never too late to allow yourself to be seen and truly loved for exactly who you are. May your dreams be peaceful, may your sleep be restorative, and may you awaken with renewed strength, ready to face whatever tomorrow brings. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We hope Elle and Kade's journey touched your heart and reminded you of the fire that still burns within you, giving you strength for the days ahead. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking, commenting, sharing this video, and subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to us and gives us the courage and energy to keep creating more stories filled with love, redemption, and transformation. And don't forget, at the end of this video, you'll see another suggested story from our channel. Click and be swept away by another moving tale just like this one. Thank you for being here with us. From all of us at Wild West Lone Hearts, we're grateful for your support.